Well, joining us now to look back and discuss the landmark ruling, we have with us tonight former Solicitor General Florin Hilbay, who was actually the one who argued the Philippines' case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. And we are honored to have him join us live here in studio tonight, this being a special day. Good evening, Attorney Hilbay. Thank you for coming out of the woodwork to speak with us about this very important ruling. Today is all
Once
about...
a year I'll do this.
Only on July 12th every year. I said it in my intro, but not a lot of people know it. You actually led the Philippines, the late Secretary Albert Del Rosario led the team, but you are the one who argued the Philippines' case in that closed-door hearing.
Okay, well, the Philippines had what is known as an agent or the official representative, and there were two agents during the arbitration. The first one was former Solicitor General Francis Hardelesa, and when he got appointed to the Supreme Court, I was the one who replaced him. And so I was burdened with the unenviable task of having to sign everything and manage the arbitration.
Right. So you were the one who argued the case in the end in 2015.
Yes, we also had
The
other
American
lawyers.
lawyer. His name. What was his name? Attorney.
Foley Howag.
That's
Right.
Yes,
Michael Riesman.
that's right. How big was your team then? Talk us through that time again.
Okay, so there was an internal team at the Office of the Solicitor General. There was a legal team from Malacanang. We also coordinated with the Department of Foreign Affairs. And then, of course, we coordinated with the American Council.
On paper, you were the only signatory.
Yes, there's only one who signs, and so there's only one who gets blamed when something bad really happens.
But something good happened.
But yeah, we won.
Yeah, but it's very difficult. It was very difficult to anticipate what the arbitral tribunal was going to do because this was an entirely novel case. And in many ways, this was a highlight event for the UNCLOS itself because the system is still quite new. They're still trying to build their set of laws and jurisprudence. And so we believe that had the tribunal dismissed our case, then they simply would have basically destroyed their own institution. And so this was a make or break case for the tribunal itself.
And if I'm not mistaken, they use this now as a precedent for other such cases, right?
Right. It becomes a very important statement of issues that are similar to the case that we won.
Attorney, we're showing the photo of the group. This is back in 2015, I believe.
2015.
Who was with you then at the front? Of course, we have the late Secretary.
SFA, the Secretary of National Defense, Ronald Llamas, of course, some members from the Department of Foreign Affairs.
They were there in what capacity? As
observers, no? One of the, I mean, there's a PR aspect to this entire thing, and one of the recommendations of the Foreign Council was to bring a large enough contingent, so we're able to communicate that we're really serious with this case.
Let's go to the arbitral award that the Philippines got and won in July 12 of 2016 at the transition phase of the Pinoy administration to the Duterte administration.
12 days
that
after.
was right in the middle of that.
Right.
And the Duterte government obviously took a surprising turn after the win by having friendlier relations with China, which they justified as saying this arbitral award is just a piece of paper. The real battle is out in the seas. And now the Marcos government has taken a different turn, pivoted towards a different direction, taking on assertive transparency and going head-to-head with China out there. My question for you is, did you expect things to unravel the way they did from 2016, the way it did during the Duterte administration? Did you expect that to go that route? And are you happy with the way this administration is standing up for what we won back in 2016?
Okay. I think, the previous administration, one way or another, was compromised, right? They were too nice to the Chinese, and so there was a lot of disappointment on the part of Filipinos and those who argued the case for the Philippines, right? And so they pivoted hard towards China from the position of the Pinoy administration to fight it out, right? So what we were able to accomplish was a legal title and moral high ground, right? I think the Duterte administration, on the other hand, saw it as a purely political tool, right, to establish friendlier relations with China. The uniqueness of our constitution is that basically every 6 years you can have a new policy. And now that you have a new president who seems to be more allied with the United States rather than with China, then you have a policy of greater assertiveness over our rights.
But then they also said the Duterte government defends themselves by saying there was no way to enforce that ruling because the UNCLOS doesn't have an enforcing body, and that was the more pragmatic route for us to take to be able to sign or have an agreement with China to let our fishermen fish in our EEZ. For one, in Bajo de Masinloc, Scarborough Shoal, they had to establish those relations to be able to protect the welfare of Filipinos out in the West Philippine
well,
Sea.
of course, you have to look at the communities that have skin in the game. Of course, the most affected here are our fisher folk. And if you look at it from that perspective, then there's plausible justification what the previous administration did. And then, of course, you need to ask the larger question, which is, at what cost, were we able to accomplish that, sort of intermittent peace between China and the Philippines? It's only now, I think, that, facts are coming out, about the previous administration that allows us to see maybe the way in which they overextended, in terms of their pivot back to China. So now that you have a new administration, which has become more assertive of the title that we were able to earn, you have a basically new set of considerations, which is, should we file another case against China? Should we set up better alliances with, say, the ASEAN, Japan, the EU, and Australia, which have a lot of economic interest in the region?
So should we file another case?
It really depends on the president, because this is a potentially legacy-defining moment for him, as it was for President Aquino and for President Duterte. And, if you want to talk real politics here, you might want to ask what's in it for him, right? Can he dribble this thing? And if he's thinking, at the very pragmatic level, he's probably going to have to ask himself, how do I move forward? So he's looking at the 2025 elections, and that might be a way by which he's able to distinguish the administration candidates from the opposition candidates, like pro-China versus, pro-Philippines, right? He also has to look at the allies. There's a lot of uncertainty, for example, with respect to the MDT. Some people would say, we're just ants here, and the elephants that are fighting is really the US and China. So can we rely on the United States to defend us? And, the MDT really is just a political document. It really depends on the interests of the US. And there's also a lot of uncertainty in the US right now. Who's going to be the president, by the end of the year, right? And what will a Trump presidency mean for the Philippines? And will Biden run again for the election? You also have to look at China, China's economy is imploding, right? One of their biggest banks just declared bankruptcy. 40 banks just disappeared in the last few weeks, right? And the problem with, economies that are, countries who have problems with their economies that they're looking to pump prime their economy. And a war is a very good way to pump prime your economy. And given the uncertainty everywhere, you have a situation in Ukraine, in Palestine, and possibly in Taiwan. Would you want another flashpoint, which is the South China Sea? So those are the things that President Marcos might want to consider, right?
But I wanted to ask you, Attorney, you're in a unique perspective, which is you guys filed a case.
Right.
Then you just had to wait and see what would happen. Nobody knew, right? In your opinion, the way that it has been used by the last two administrations, the current one and the previous one, are you happy with how it has been enforced? We already discussed like how different the approaches were between the Duterte administration and the current one, at least where this one is leading to. How interesting is it for you to watch this all unfold? Like what really goes on in your head?
Well, my advantage is that I can always sit down and say I've done my part, right? And it's really very difficult because there's so many moving parts. It's unfortunate that we will no longer be able to ask, for example, former President Aquino, right? What his considerations were in filing the case. Well, we can still ask President Duterte what his real considerations were, but the reality is we're at some sort of disadvantage because of the nature of our politics, right? In China, because of the structure of their politics, you can have a very long timeline.
You mean Xi Jinping can rule forever?
Yeah.
Well, at
And
this
say
point,
one
he's
thing
president
forever.
for life.
For as long as he
We
wants.
have discussed that because they are,
And he's
well,
already-
let's say it, they're
and-
communists.
And he's already tweaked the rules to keep himself in power.
Exactly. And so he can prepare for a very long time.
And he can maintain one line.
Right. Whereas in the Philippines, you need to change your president every 6 years. Unless, of course, you have a new constitution before the end of President Marcos's term and he gets to stay on in power and therefore develop a longer timeline when it comes to establishing a definite and clear policy with respect to the West Philippine Sea.
So do you think we have actually not managed to come up? I mean, it has been 8 years. What with the political system here, policies will change every 6 years. Do you think that it's even possible for us to form like one defining overarching policy?
Right.
Because it is possible, even with our setup.
Yes, of course. I think you need to take a very long view when it comes to, issues with respect to the West Philippine Sea. The most important part of winning the case that we're able to get the title, right? That's really bad for China because it puts China at the defensive. It places China in the position of the aggressor. And it takes a lot of effort to be able to overcome that. And so what China has right now is time, political might, right, and economic power. Will it be able to sustain that, right, and at some point be able to take over the entire South China Sea and just dispense with the UNCLOS system? I don't think it can do that. And so I think at some point, the title will become very important. We'll be able to use it in a very significant
It is
way.
being referenced by studies all
Right.
over the world when it comes to maritime territory. So it does help set a precedent to everything else. But as you mentioned, China is very good at knowing their strengths and knowing our weaknesses. And you've mentioned already a suggestion that the current administration can do, which is to have a West Philippine Sea point person. You mentioned that, and
That was before June 17.
June 17 happened.
After June 17 happened, we were all sitting here thinking,
Was he right? Was he correct in what he said?
and we did ask a bunch of analysts like about your suggestion and
They
what
did-
they thought about it. Because, I mean, we saw after the fact, after you had said it, that's the time we
Right.
saw the
and they
value.
did defend having several spokespersons. We asked them directly, and they told us that they were all singing to the same tune up until June 17. when a party was out of tune, right? Specifically in that incident, and that's where it gets complicated. But other analysts will say that actually helps us because taking a look at the chessboard, we're the weaker party. If you're going up against a superpower, it probably would help to be able to confuse them somehow.
Well, it's possible that
Right?
that's precisely President Marcos's strategy, which is deliberate uncertainty, because he's probably buying time, thinking about the timeline for when he wants to act, whether he really wants to file a case or not, or maybe just sit down and wait things out and let the next president take care of the matter. Because, again, if you ask me, what's really in it for him? Right? I mean, filing a case is a defining moment in his presidency, and there's no assurance that we're going to win this time around.
So that's a win.
Attorney, I
That's
have
a
a,
win
pro-
for
I
him,
have
right?
a, I have a thought on that. The one thing, though, that this has accomplished, it is one of the things that Filipinos seem to agree on top of we have to handle
Correct.
inflation.
Right.
The other thing that Filipinos agree on is our what to do. It's one thing that actually unites, right? That was a campaign promise of the Marcos administration.
Well, no,
Keep talking about unity.
No. They, to be clear, they are united that we have to do more in the West Philippine Sea. But the question of whether we should spend to file a case has not been asked
Right.
to the electorate
Yes.
because you guys spent a lot of money to
Right.
file that arbitration
Right.
case, right?
Right.
So again, comes back to
I think if we decide to file a case, we can do it in-house. There's probably enough people within government institutions, the OSG, the DFA, even Malacanang, who are knowledgeable enough to do this time around. The real question is, does the president want to do it? Because
But what-
no one will want to do this.
What grounds have we not covered with the first arbitral award?
And why? Why would the president not want to go there, so to speak?
Okay. What grounds? I think the damage that China has done, is basically a very powerful platform for filing another case. Assessing the
Environmental,
amount of the damage,
ecological.
I think, is very important.
You're talking about the environmental damage.
Right. Maybe you can have a greater clarification of the rights of the fisher folk. Right? Filing a case is really not that easy because China has so many weapons. Right. The situation is in Australia, for example, is a very good exemplar. The economic retaliation of China, against the action of Australia was really very burdensome for the wine sector, the lobster sector, etc. And so it's really not that easy. The way to look at it really is the filing of the case is not simply a legal matter, right? It's a very political matter as well, because if you look at Filipinos, they will say that, well, didn't we just win that case, right?
Isang
Shouldn't we
kaso
be
na
able-
naman, hindi naman
right?
ma-enforce.
Exactly. But for those who have effective authority and power, right, things are so much more complicated, right? Because there's always a timing for everything. You don't want to file a case in which the world will see the Philippines as being the tip of the spear, right? When we filed the case against China in 2012, we basically asked everyone, can you join us? And no one joined us. Everybody was behind the Philippines, but nobody decided to stand beside us. And so we
and
paid
now
for
it's
everything.
cool to support the Philippines.
Right. So, for example, if you look at the event this morning, Australia, Japan,
The
Singapore, the US,
Strong
were
statements.
behind
Yeah.
you. Strong statements. But they're basically urging us to do something on our own, right?
Right.
Because
It's not
they themselves,
beside us.
right, and we're the ones that's being pushed, to fight China, and that's something that places the president in a position of brinkmanship, because it's very difficult to know and assess what China is going to do if he decides to file a case. Like, for example, say up the ante in the West Philippine Sea, do something, that makes the president really, that really embarrasses the president and the nation, right? And what will he do when he's placed in a position of brinkmanship? That's a reality that we have to face. And so I really don't envy the president, the Solicitor General, or the executive secretary, because there's so much uncertainty, right? And we don't really have a lot of tools, but we do have the title and the moral high ground, and what they do with that,
It's a question.
is a question for them to decide.
We could debate the filing another case ad infinitum, but in the end, I think most of the analysts we've spoken to agree that China will never recognize any of these legal cases. But my question to you is, if I had a magic wand and I could take you back to that point in time in 2012, what would you do differently? Now,
If anything.
if anything, and if you knew that the next two presidents will be Duterte and Marcos, what would you do differently?
Nothing really, because that's a 100% win for us. Right? When we were assessing the probability of winning, the many cases that we filed, the many issues that we filed against China, we never really expected that we would win everything. Right? The win was actually better than expected, right? Because there were, in fact, a lot of debates internally, right, among the lawyers and policymakers within the Aquino administration as to what is the nature of an acceptable defeat, or a happy win, or this type of win. We
Wait,
never
so the
actually
award was actually better than you guys had expected, or you personally had expected?
Well, I think you need to manage your expectations.
All the
right?
time, yes, I agree with you on that.
No, I think your team took on this very smartly, knowing the limitations of the arbitral tribunal, knowing which points to argue and which road to take. You were very, very specific.
Well,
with
in hindsight, we look like geniuses now, but when we were doing the case, there was
A
so
lot of
much uncertainty.
uncertainty.
We never were really sure as to how the tribunal was going to decide. All I knew was that you need to look for the best possible arguments for the case and make the arbitrators, see and feel the case for the Philippines.
Amazing. So you ended up making the right decision every step of the way, even though back then it didn't feel like it. So it's all like, it's
So
funny
no
you say that.
regrets.
There were so many debates every step of the way.
Although
right?
at this point, China still says that the tribunal did not have jurisdiction.
Well,
They
can't do
issued
anything
that
about-
just yesterday. Actually,
but
they
half
put out
of the award actually talks about jurisdiction.
Yes.
Right.
You need to realize that the arguments that we use against China were China's arguments when we were drafting the UNCLOS. Number two, China is still part of the UNCLOS system, which has a compulsory arbitration mechanism. I'd say at the highest level, China knows that they lost the case. China understands the meaning of the decision, but for political reasons, they simply
They will never acknowledge it.
they will never acknowledge it. I'm sure that there were a lot of people that higher level.
Would you say, even if they don't acknowledge it publicly, they do somehow adhere to it in the seas
Well,
with how they've been acting?
so long as they are parties to the UNCLOS, right, they're bound to comply. The fact that they haven't, used military might, the fact that they're actually asking for some kind of a compromise is in fact implicit recognition that they know that we have rights over the case. If I were China and I absolutely knew I had full rights over 95% of the South China Sea, I'm not going to talk about joint development with the Philippines. I'm not going to look for compromise. I'm not going to just patrol. I'm going to take over the entire area. And if you look at it from that perspective, right, that's recognition that China knows that it doesn't have the legal rights over the West Philippine Sea. It doesn't have strong grounds. All it has is
It does have
political
mischief
might.
reef, though. Since then, I think they've
yes,
you know,
but
fully
that's been declared
militarized.
as having been constructed illegally,
right.
right? And so, I think
So
if
still
you look
a
at
win.
it from the
Yeah.
standpoint of China, their basic principle is, yeah, we recognize the UNCLOS, but every superpower is an exceptionalist. And we are a superpower now. And we do what we want to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the reality of the situation. Now, whether the Philippines can gather enough courage and muster enough support so that everyone in the region, the ASEAN, Japan is highly dependent on the South China Sea, Australia and the US can put some counterweight to what China is doing, is really up to what? The genius of the current president and the future
And also the
presidents of the
domestic
Republic.
politics of the countries that you just mentioned, right?
Yes, the domestic politics and what happens in the United States in
Yeah.
the coming months.
Yeah. You know who's not a signatory to UNCLOS is our biggest ally, the
The
United
United
States.
States.
But that is a conversation for another day.